Okay, we should be live now. Hopefully you can see me. Hopefully you can hear me. Just checking the chat at the moment to find out. Okay, I can see me. And Google is telling me that the event is live. I'm just going to refresh the page that I'm seeing to check that it is all working. Some people are having trouble. Sometimes these things take a little while to get going. I'm just waiting to make sure that everyone can see me before I start. Some people can see me, great. Hi, Terry. Okay. So we're starting to work. Okay, for the people that can see me, can you hear me okay? Unfortunately, there's this funny problem with Google Hangouts, which I'm using for this, where there's a slight time lag between me saying something and you seeing it wherever you happen to be. So I have to wait a little bit for replies to come. Yeah, it looks like everyone can see me and everyone can hear me. Okay, cool. Let's get started. So firstly, thanks so much for coming. I think this is really amazing. It's only the second time I've done this. And how else? I think we're so lucky with this technology that we've got now. How else could I invite 150 people into my living room at home so you can come and watch me paint? Really is amazing. Thanks so much for coming and taking time out to watch this. Now, what I'm going to do for you is to paint a little still life, and I'm going to try and demonstrate a few features of the way that I paint and the way that I think this kind of simple approach to sight-size still life that I'm going to show you will help you to paint more realistically too, hopefully. This is the first time I've painted live on air, so whilst I'll do my very best not to zone out and just paint, most of you are painters, presumably all of you are painters, so you know what it's like that sometimes you get locked in, so I'll try not to leave any long moments of silence, but I must admit I find it very hard to do more than one thing at a time. So what I'm going to do is try to explain as I go along. Now I've got two cameras set up here. This one that you can see me on now, which shows a bit more of the setup, and I've also got a live paint cam, which focuses in on what I'm actually going to be doing behind me. So as soon as I actually start painting, I'll put that camera on, we'll switch to that camera, and you'll be able to see much better what I'm doing. One thing that's worth trying though, I'm not sure if you can do it or not, but if you can, try it. If you roll over the video with your mouse, you'll see a little settings icon. And I think you can set it to have a higher setting with greater detail. And if you can, that's probably a good idea to do, because then you'll see a little bit more. It might mean that the video will stutter a bit depending on where you are in the world. So you might need to play with it a little bit, but set it as high as you can without interrupting the video too much, because you're going to want to see the detail of the stuff once I start actually painting and putting stuff in. So I think this is probably going to last about an hour. Depends how far I can get this painting in that time and on your patience. But one of the things that I want to show you today is how reasonably accurate drawing out, good values, and matching color as closely as you can, because you can't always match it exactly. In fact, in my experience, you very rarely can match it exactly. But if you can get those three things right, you actually don't need to bring a painting to a high level of resolution in order for there to be a feeling of light and solidity about the objects. Now, as I was putting this webinar together, it struck me, it became obvious to me that there was going to be a little bit too much to cover just in this hour, hour and a half, however long we're going to have today. So I'm going to give you an overview of it today. I'm going to demonstrate painting this still life of these two little pairs here. But I'm also going to do another webinar next week, which is going to focus just on values, and one the week after that, which is going to focus on color. So I can get a bit more into the detail, which hopefully will be more helpful to you about those things. So first things first, I'm going to take you through what I have set up here. Now, this is fairly simple. This is all stuff that you can do at home, okay? The shadow box here, which you can just see behind me, which is basically it's a really simple box made out of sheets of foam board, black foam board, and you just cut it out. I just tape it together, just with ordinary tape. Stick your objects in there. It's very handy because you can control the light quite carefully with it, and you can also put different bits of colored paper in the background if you want to give yourself different backgrounds, which works really well. And it's just really handy. It gives you a nice kind of shadow from one side. I've got the light over here. Shadow box is an absolute necessity if you're going to work this way, I think, because you really need to control the light. It takes no more than about half an hour to make one, and the pieces are really cheap. The stuff you need to make one's really cheap. The second thing I've got here, obviously, is I'll get out the way a bit so you can see, is my easel here. And I've got a drawing board on my easel. And my drawing board, the drawing boards I use, it's just a sheet of MDF, which I get some craft card of the same size, and I tape that over the top. So it's good for drawing. And it also gives it, I like this gray to be working against. So this is held on the easel, and then it's kind of slid over so that when I put my painting surface over on this side of the drawing board, I can have it almost exactly next to the subject that I'm going to paint. So it makes for that real direct comparison that you get with sight size, which really, really helps you when you're making comparisons from one to the other to see which bits you need to adjust and change. So that's really useful. The third thing I've got is this viewfinder. I actually got this idea from Harold Speed, I think it was, originally from his painting book. I forget what it's called now. I'll send out a link to it on Amazon now. There's a free download I think you can get from it somewhere. You certainly can for the drawing book, so I'll see if I can find it. And basically all this is the same black foam board that the shadow box is made out of. And I've got a smaller one actually. Just let me grab you it and I'll show how I've put this together. Here we go. Now this is as simple as you like. It's just, this one needs the strings tightening up a bit. It's just a piece of black foam board with a hole cut out of it. The reason I keep this side thin and this side thick is because this side gets stuck to the back of the drawing board like that with blue tack and tape to hold it steady. And this side is going to jut out a little bit. And what I don't want is too much shadow from the light being cast by this bit. I normally work in natural light. Obviously, it's about 9 o'clock here for me at the moment, in the middle of winter, so it's dark outside. So for today, I'm working under fluorescent lights. But you can sometimes get shadows if these are too chunky, so it's better to keep them fairly small. So how do you, I mean, this bit is obviously pretty simple. You just cut it out the size you want and you cut out a bit the size you want. This hole here is 7 inches by 5 inches. Nice size for small still life, and you can get nice little gesso boards of that size. So I always try and have the same size window in the framer as I'm actually painting. And this is, you can see the high-tech way I construct these. This is just bits of red thread stuck on with blue tack. So all you need to do is measure out your half and your quarter each way, and then just cut little bits of thread, stick them on with blue tack. I don't know how clear it is. Can you see that all right? It's got little bits. It's got like a thread grid. So this is just a smaller version of this one. I usually have 2 or 3 of these hanging out. Excuse me, I've just got to let the cat out. I'll be back in a minute. Ever do a webinar with cats in the room? So this is a slightly bigger one, and this is exactly the same size as this, and this has been gridded out as well. So this really helps with the drawing out part. Now, these days I tend not to use this so much, but it's a really good way to start, because the whole of Western art, representational art, is based on this idea of the picture plane. Okay, and this is effectively your picture plane. So when you're working sight size, you're basically just trying to replicate what you see in this space over here, and it really helps you with your measuring out. But it doesn't do it for you; it just helps you. So it's a good place to start, because you start to immediately get practice with the core skill of measuring for drawing out, which is basically just judging the distance between 2 points, judging the angle of a line. It helps you a little bit with that stuff. As you progress, you can drop the number of bits of string you have on it to just 2, or you can dispense with it altogether once you get used to it and just work with that one. But it's quite useful to have it there to start with. The other nice thing about it is that it enables you to focus pretty much just on the subject that you have there, and you're not distracted by the things around it. So it's a really a good helper for that. So this is the basic setup. Now, I spend quite a bit of time putting these together and shifting it a couple of inches that way, a millimeter that way, a millimeter this way, to try and get the composition nice and what I'm looking to paint. You're actually seeing this from a slightly different angle than I'll be painting, so you can't see, you can only see the pairs stuffed in the corner there. They're much more in the center when I'll be sitting over there, which is when I'll actually be doing the painting. So that's the basic setup. Is anyone still having problems seeing? I've just seen some comments in the chat about refreshing the page. If anyone's having a problem seeing it, just refresh the page and it should come back. Just let me know in the chat if you're having any problems with it at all, and I'll try and sort anything out that comes up as we go along. What else do I want to tell you about this? Hopefully that should be fairly clear about the basic setup. One of the other things I have to go over before we start, which is really important, I think, and I got this wrong for years, and I struggled and struggled because of it, because I hadn't figured it out, is you need to make sure that you can hit as much as you can of the value range in your subject on your painting surface, dependent on the light that you have coming onto it. So just to kind of demonstrate this for you, this is just a really simple, about the simplest value scale you could find. Okay, that's titanium white, ivory black, and that's a mid-value grey in the middle. So I can hold this, because I've got this set up here with my board and with my viewfinder. I can hold this at the same angle to the light as my painting surface is, and I can scan it across the front of the image. I'll do this again in a minute when I change to the live paint cam, as I'm amusingly calling it, to make sure that you can, it shows you where you can't hit the lights and where you can't hit the darks. For instance, if I had this whole setup here with the drawing board angled slightly away from the light, then what I can see here, the lightest light that I can see perceptually when I paint it on my surface will likely be darker than the lightest light I can see there. And it makes that direct comparison much more difficult to do. And you'll hopefully be able to see this better when I move to the other camera, which is much better quality than the one I'm using at this point to show you the whole setup. But for this setup, I've got this angled so that I can hit the lights fairly easily, but the darkest part, this is ivory black paint, so this is about as dark as I can go with oil paint, okay? And it's still not as dark as the deep shadows in the corner at the back. So I know before I start this painting that I'm going to have to do some kind of compression with the values. And if you don't know that before you go into a painting, it's very likely that you'll struggle. Really handy thing to do. What you can do, what I do sometimes is, I've got two of these little scales. Here's another I prepared earlier. You can put one on the subject like that, and you can stick one on the board, and then you can angle your board and check the comparison between the white there and the white there. You can see how this is set, that white is lighter than this white. But thankfully, I don't have a white object in this still life to paint, so that's not going to be too much of a problem for me. You'll find that even with indoor light, even in natural light, if you're painting still life like this, people generally assume that you can hit the values that you see. I'm here to tell you that you can't. You will have to compress the values sooner or later, one way or another. The only way to do a painting in which you don't have to compress the values is to paint in a very narrow value range, which you can do. You can have a very narrow value range in your subject, but it tends to make for possibly slightly dull pictures if you paint all your pictures that way, because the wider the value range you paint with generally, the more impact your picture has. You know, it will have more contrast. You don't always want to be painting within quite a narrow range of your subject. So that's really worth bearing in mind. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail on the webinar next week when I talk about the values. But that's just to explain that this is already set up that way. So I already know going into this painting that the little highlights on the pairs, I'm going to struggle. Sorry, I can hit, but the darkest darks I know I can't quite get to. And it's always worth knowing that before you go in. So I'm not sure there's anything else I really need to tell you about the setup at the moment. Can you hear me okay still? Someone's having problems. Can you hear me now? Maybe it's jumping a little bit. Someone's saying set the quality to auto. That might be a good idea to do if it's starting to jump around. It depends. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the paintbrushes as I go along. Don't worry about that. Okay, I'm going to, it seems most people can hear me, so I'm just going to keep going. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to switch over to the other camera and I'll start just with the drawing out. And I'll try and talk you through a simple approach to doing that. Many of you may already be doing something very similar to this, but it would be good for me to go over it for you, I think, for the people that perhaps haven't tried working side-to-sides like this. And the last thing I want to show you before we go on to the close-up is the palette. Okay. Now, I think that's getting a little blown out by the light. Perhaps that's a little clearer. Let me just explain what I've got on here. Firstly, around here, I've got a string of neutrals. These are Munsell neutrals. It's not just black and white. It's mixed with a little bit of burnt umber as well. So they're proper neutral colors. They're very useful because in this setup, I've got neutrals in the background and in the ground as well. And they're also very useful for neutralizing your colors, bringing them back further to gray if you need to as you paint. And I've also already cheated a little bit here. I've already mixed up, pre-mixed if you like, many of the colors that I know I'm going to need for these pairs. Now that's partly for expediency's sake because I want to get through this painting quickly, relatively quickly. But I usually do this anyway, although I'll usually mix less of these. But let me just explain what I've got here. What's interesting about these pairs and why I chose them to paint is that they have two different local colors. I think you ought to be able to see them even on this camera, but they'll be very obvious to you on the other one, is that there's a grayish, darker green, which is most of the color, and then there's a slightly brighter, higher chroma, lighter green, kind of overlaid and dotted over it. So, but both of those locals, as the form changes from light to dark, will change. They'll get darker and the chroma will drop. as they go into the shadow, and they'll get lighter, obviously in value, higher in value as they go into the light. So what I've got here, this is the brighter green part. So I've pre-mixed a few colors, so I've got these ready to model the form as I go. And this is the more gray part. And around here, I've just got the colors that I use to make these colors, which is, this is Winsor & Newton sap green, which is really useful because it has a low value but quite a high chroma, and that's difficult to get in green sometimes. Yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, raw umber and burnt umber. I didn't need very much to be able to get the colors together. And oh, actually, one other thing I do need to show you is how I mix those colors, because one of the most difficult things, excuse me, I'll be with you in a moment. One of the most difficult things about painting realistic still life is getting the colors right. Okay, if you can get the colors right across the form will live. If you get them wrong, especially the values, if you get the values wrong, then it will be difficult to get a feeling of light and solidity to the objects in the painting. So the way that I do that is this. I have, hopefully if I can get the light to reflect on that, you can see it. This is a little clear acetate sheet. This is really cheap, this stuff. You get it in A4 sheets from office supply shops. And it's just, use it for OHP printers, you know, for writing on. So you just need to cut a little bit off, just a simple acetate sheet. This, never go anywhere without one of these. It's a color isolator. Very posh word for what's basically just a piece of card with a hole in it. Okay, so I can move this over the front of my still life, and I can isolate the colors at various places. That helps me get the values right and to see what I can and can't hit with paint, especially if I use a value scale with it. You know, I can compare the values of what I have on my value scale with the values that I see. But what I can also do, and I won't demonstrate this bit until I'm on the other camera because you need to see this close up, is I can paint a little dab of the color that I'm trying to match, you know, the color that I'm mixing on this acetate sheet, hold it against the color checker and then hold it up against the subject to see how close I'm getting. Now there's a really important caveat here, okay, which is what I was saying earlier, is that most of the time you can't match the colors that you see exactly. And almost all of the time you can't match the value range you see. So it's not simply a case of paint by numbers, getting the exact color you need, mixing it up and sticking it down there. Sometimes it is for some things, but you're also going to have to, you still need to use your eyes, and you still need to change and manipulate what you have on your painting to get the greatest effect of realism. And that might not necessarily be exactly what you see. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the painting. So now I think it's probably time to test out the first bit of technology and see if we can swap over to the other camera. Now at this point, you should see just a close-up. You'll still be able to hear me, hopefully, but for what you see, you should just see a close-up of the painting with the subject beside it. Okay, now that looks like it's worked to me. As soon as that's happening, if anyone can tell me if they can now see, hopefully, the subject, the two pairs, and the painting surface beside it. If you could just tell me, yeah, fantastic, thank you. Anon 4182, I'm sure that's not your real name, but thank you very much. That's great to know that it's worked. So now I'm going to move things around a little bit, and then I can get started actually painting. Sorry if there's a bit of interference, I just need to move the mic. There we go. Okay, hopefully we should be set up now. Now it should be hopefully reasonably obvious to you that what I've kind of got here is a gridded up version of my subject. So what I'm going to start doing now is fairly quickly, I'm just getting a bit of, can I get this on there? I'm just getting a bit of burnt umber there, mixed with a little bit of terps. Okay. It's about the right consistency. Reasonably thin. And I'm just going to fairly quickly just block this in. Now, a good thing to do with sight size is to mark your highest and lowest and then your furthest left and furthest right points first, so you know exactly where everything is going to go and you can relate everything to those points. Now, another real advantage of this little framer is it means that I can, by sighting through, I can line up parts of the pairs with the grid, points on the grid, and I can pretty much make sure that each time I sit back, I'm probably sitting back, I'm at a long brush reach away from the easel now. That's with my arm at full stretch, I can just about get to the easel. And I want to be like this, I want to be further back, because that also permits that light for light comparison. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to start blocking things in. The highest point of the first pair on the left is just about there. It's actually on the line. The lowest point of that pair is around here. I'm going to do this probably a little quicker than I would normally do it. The furthest left point of the two pairs together, the furthest left point of that pair is about here, a little bit further in. I'll be able to do some corrections as I go if I need to. The furthest right point of the pair that's lying down, having a little rest, is just about here. So now I've got my highest, my lowest, my furthest left and furthest right points in. It's much easier for me to see where everything else needs to go. So I really just need to refine it a little bit in from here. So the pair on the right that's lying down, the highest point of that pair is about here. You can actually measure this stuff. You can sight across with your ruler, with a ruler or with your brush, or you can use a thread to do it. That works very well too. Sorry, someone's just asked me, I did forget to say, yes, what I'm using for painting here, because this is just little studies that I'm doing. I'm just using Winsor & Newton oil color paper. There's a shot of the cover of the pad. I wouldn't use that if I was doing a finished painting, but for studies and practice pieces like these, it's a nice cheap way. The surface isn't ideal, but it's fine, you know. I don't worry too much about those things just for exercises like this. Furthest left part of that pair is over here. The pair that's lying down is over here. The very bottom part of the pair that's lying down, the lowest point of it, is about there. Of course, it's there. Now, all I have at the moment is a few dots, right? It's not particularly interesting. Doesn't really look like anything. But what I ought to be able to do now, fairly quickly, is to start joining these together to rough in the actual shape that I have here. I tend to do this with a mostly kind of straightish lines, not too many curves. I find it's easier to judge, easy to see when you do it this way. one of the things I want to try and avoid whilst I'm doing this as well is to get into a kind of myopia and staring at one little bit for too long, which is really easy to do, and apparently is something that we naturally, or at least if we're not, haven't done an awful lot of drawing and painting and haven't had any training, we tend to just follow a contour of something with our eye. And the reason that can be a problematic thing to do is that it makes it very difficult to relate the bit that you're doing back to the whole. What you need to be doing the whole time is relating the position of the part that you're drawing right now to the whole. You need to be seeing the gestalt, not a particularly small part of it. And that's one of the reasons that drawing is so difficult for people who are just learning. Drawing accurately is so difficult for people who are just learning. This is actually really odd for me because I've got the monitor behind me now, because I'm facing a different direction than I was before. And I can't actually tell what's on the screen. So the whole thing could go down and I could be here merrily painting and chatting away and I simply wouldn't know. So I'll just have to trust that everything is working okay and you can still see and hear me, or well, see what I'm doing and hear me as I'm going. So that's about as quick a blocking as I would ever do. You know, I just want to get the general shape right. Have a quick look and judge what I've got wrong. Some bits are a little bit out. That's a bit more down there. But overall, it's not too bad. Now, what you need to remember when you're looking at this on the video is that the camera that you're looking at it through is at a very slightly different angle to the subject and the drawing than the viewpoint I'm looking at it from. It's very slightly different. So you may see some things that you think, he's got that totally wrong. It's not there at all. And actually, you might be right. But it's more likely that it's a slight different. I've actually got the camera just a few inches to the side of my head. So it's fairly close. I'm just blocking in some of the surrounding stuff now, making sure I get that in the right place too. It's as close a viewpoint as I can easily get. Cast shadow, got to be about there. Another little cast shadow. Now I'm not actually filling anything in. What I'm not doing is an underpainting here. I mean, you can. It's a perfectly good way to paint, and I do that sometimes. But for this, I know I've already got my colours pretty much mixed. I've already sorted out a lot of my values with the pre-mixing that I've done. So I should be pretty much okay. Famous last words. All right, so that's as far as I need to take the drawing in, I think. Let me briefly have a quick look. Oh, something I should point out now, as I was saying before, it's very difficult for me to watch the chat whilst I'm painting because the monitor is behind me. So if you have questions about anything that I'm using as I'm working here, it's probably best if you could make a quick note of them, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. It's going to be much easier because the thing is I can see the chat is scrolling fairly quickly. So by the time I turn around again, I will have missed some of your questions. So do try, if you have a question, make a quick note of it and we can talk about it at the end. I'll answer as best I can. Just quickly, one I can see there is what light bulbs I'm using. Now these are fluorescents. This is a photographic lighting kit I'm using. So it's a single head, but it has 4 fluorescent bulbs in it of 45 watts each. And they're those energy savers, so they put out, you know, whatever it is, equivalent of blah blah blah, whatever, more light than that. It's quite strong, and it's got a softbox over it, a diffuser. Otherwise, you tend to get this really kind of harsh light, which I don't like so much. The temperature of them is, I think it's 55K, something approaching the temperature of light you would get from a north light window. So it's a very cool light. I'm not actually sure what the CRI is of these lights, but it's a good idea if you have lights with a CRI of over 90. But the CRI is one of those things that people get very obsessed about. It stands for color rendering index, and it's how well, how reliably you can render colors under a particular light. But it's by no means a complete science, and there's some disagreement about whether CRI is actually any good at all among people who know lots of stuff about these things. I've actually just got these lights. Normally I paint under natural light if I possibly can. I've just got these lights for that. A couple more things. Someone was asking about the brushes, I think, so let me just talk quickly about that. For a long time I've been using Robertson or Cornelison bristle hog brushes, but I've just treated myself to these, which are Rosemary's brushes. Rosemary brushes, you can look her up on Google, and I have to say this is a Kolinsky Sable round, and it's just an absolutely beautiful brush. It holds quite a bit of paint. It goes to a very fine point at the end, and it keeps that point, so it's extremely good for fine detail, very good for roughing out. So I use those a lot for roughing out. But my kind of workhorse brush is this one, which is also Rosemary's brush, and this is a Mongoose filbert, and it's a long filbert, so hopefully you can see there that the bristle part of the brush is longer than usual, and these are lovely. They hold loads of paint and have a beautiful, beautiful touch on the surface that you're painting on. I really think it's worth spending some money to get excellent brushes, and I must say these brushes I think are absolutely excellent. Mongoose I think now has been discontinued. If anyone has any stock left, you can still get them, but mongoose is an endangered species, so quite rightly you can't buy mongoose brushes anymore. At least they're not making them anymore. And one other word about brushes, which I'll mention again when I actually get into painting, is when I'm painting an object, or if I'm painting a background, I buy brushes in sets of 3, because the way I use them is I'll have one for the lights, one for the medium values, and one for the dark values, and I'll try and keep them separated. And I might have 5 or 6 different colors mixed, pre-mixed, but I might use 2 colors across the darks, 2 across the middles, and 1 on the lights. And it really helps you to make sure that you don't pollute each brush with one of the others, and it keeps them clean. So I always buy them in sets of 3. So when I got these brushes, I think I bought 3 sets of 3. So if I'm painting like a pear, an orange, and a pot or something, I'll have a set of 3 brushes separate for each element of the painting that I'm painting. I'll show you a bit more about that when I'm actually doing it. So at this point, I'm close enough, right? So I'm going to start putting some colour in. Now, usually for the background, I would scrub it in using a bright. And now a bright is, this is a bright. It's a bristle brush, and it has very short bristles, and it's stiff, you know. And you need strong hands to be able to work that in, but it also takes a while. The nice thing about a bright is that you can scrub in the background, and you get an even covering, that's very thin. But it takes a little while to scrub in, so for sake of speed, I'm just going to go straight in with a filbert. So I know that over the right-hand side of my painting, I need to go as low as I possibly can. Over here is where I've got the darkest part of the subject. On the camera, all of this looks pretty much an even value. In fact, it's slightly lighter over this side and darker over this side, but it's only It might show better in the video actually, but it's only a step or so. So up to about here, from here to here, is basically, I need to go as dark as I can possibly go, so I'm just going to go straight in with black. Now, for sake of speed, as I say, I'm just using a filbert and I've mixed it. I've just put a little bit of terps in with it. I know a lot of people don't like to paint with terps. You know, OMS, anything is fine. This is just to help it go in quickly. But I'm painting it thinly. I don't want to slap it on there because the thickness and the texture of the paint makes a difference to the feeling of reality, I think, that you get once you move on to the object and you get further through the painting. This is a very set, systematic way of building up a painting. I think, if I remember right, I got this first from Hotel Speed 2, where you start with the background first. I won't put the whole lot in because it will take forever, so I'll just put enough in so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so that's my darkest dark brush that I'm using there for the darks. I'm going to get another brush out to paint slightly lighter on the other side, because over this side I can see, as I say, I don't know if it's showing, but it's very slightly lighter value, so I'm only going up a step or so on my palette. I'm going, there's black, and I'm just going up like around here. And I'll just scrub some of that in. This is the kind of thing that probably you would only be able to see if you look at the painting in the flesh. I might need to adjust this a little bit as I go through, but for now I just want to make sure that I have something in there. This is a Robertson's bristle brush that I've got out now, and it's fine, you know, but it's just, the feel of it isn't anything like as nice as those rosemary brushes. If you get in touch with the rosemary and you get some other brushes, tell her I sent you, and I think her brushes are brilliant, because I haven't had time to give her a proper review on their site yet. So that's pretty much as I need to put in right now with the background, I think. Go a little bit lighter over here. Now, on the edges where I'm coming over to the object, I'm kind of feathering them. I don't know if that's a word that people generally use, but I'm making sure that really sure that I haven't got thick paint there. I don't want to go into those objects too much, but I also don't want a ridge, you know, so that's fairly light. So that's the background blocked in pretty soon. That could easily have been a color as well, but for this one, as I say, I've just used neutral colors in the background and the ground to make it, to help the pairs stand out, so you can see what I'm painting better. Now over here, this is a slightly lighter value. Now I've already, here's a good point for me to show you the little color checker thing. It's really good to do with value. So I think, let me show you the palette again. I think the value of this front bit here is probably about there. This is actually a Munsell scale, so that's like 5 to 6, probably something like that. I think it's probably about there. I've got a different brush up again now, so I don't want to pollute these colors. I think it's probably about there, so I'll get a bit of that, paint it on my little swatch. Fortunately, I need to put that on the palette to do it. Right, so there's a swatch with a little bit of that color on it, and I can just hold it there and try and judge. but I think it helps if I use the little color checker thing, because then I can isolate the part of the color that I'm trying to look at. As I was saying before, it's really important when you do this to make sure that you hold this little color checker at the same angle to the light always. So make sure that you hold it at the same angle as the framer. It would be nice to have some gizmo that let you slide this thing around. You know, it would take a lot of the worry out of it, because if you change the angle of this, you can see that's got lighter and it's got darker. Let me put it up against a bit of the, you see what I mean? If you change the angle, you can judge a color completely wrong. So you've got to be really careful to hold it up at the right angle. Looks like I'm about right there. Maybe it's slightly lighter than that, what I've got there. But that, in a nutshell, is how you can use the color checker to check your colors as well, with the caveat, as I was saying before, that there will be some colors that you can't match, and sometimes you will want to change the color you see in order to create a more realistic effect in the painting. But being able to see the difference between what you've got on your palette and what you can see there, and which bits you can hit and which bits you can't, will really help you make decisions about what colors you use where in your painting. And it's a bit like, it helps you to get close. It doesn't do the work for you. You can do all of that judging, but you still need a practiced eye. You still need to practice judging and matching colors. I've got some handy little exercises that help you build that skill in an isolated way. And the reason is that even if you do that, you can easily make mistakes, or you might just decide that the effect is wrong when you actually see it on the painting and that you want something different. But it helps you if you're in the general ballpark of what you want. Otherwise, the chances are you'll be nowhere near with the colors that you're trying to get. Especially, I mean, once you've had some practice with this, you can dispense with a lot of this stuff. But if you struggle sometimes with getting a feeling of reality into your painting, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold at the moment. It may be, it's likely that your values or your colors are slightly out. And this will get you close. This method with a color checker will get you close to the colors you want. And like with measuring, it's much easier to judge a small distance than it is a very large distance. Very large distance, you'll very likely make a wide margin of error. If you're trying to judge a small distance, it will be much easier. And it's the same with colors and values. If you get close with something like this little color checker method, and then you whack it on the canvas, then you can, when you're working sides like this, you can flick from one to the other. Flick your eye, they call it the flick. It's almost like you can create the effect of like an animated picture book, and it's the differences really stand out between what you're doing, what you've got here, and what you've got here. Excuse me, my cough is getting worse. Okay, so what I'm doing now, obviously this bit here, which I'm painting, is quite a soft gradation. So I want to manage that now. I'll show you what I think is a nice way to do that. This is where it comes in quite handy that I've got a range here. I'm not going to need to use all of them because I'm only mixing and blending from this value around to about that one. But what I can do is take a little bit of them and kind of paint them in fairly roughly, working along the range until I feel like I'm starting to get out of my darks, at which point I'll switch to my lighter brush. Come out this way. And what I then do is a really nice way to create smooth gradations is I get a dry brush. This again is a mongoose filbert. And if you kind of hatch across scrub the brush dry on a paper towel or something, and then pull out. You get a nice smooth blend. You can do that as many times as you want to until you get something pretty close. Now, obviously, I could spend a lot of time doing that, and ordinarily I would if this was a finished painting. But because this is an exercise, I'm going to go quite quickly. I'm going to try to go quite quickly. I'm mindful of the fact that we're almost up to an hour yet, and now I haven't painted any of the pairs yet. But with a lot of this stuff, I find as well, a lot of it is about preparing things right. And if you start well, with your values set up well, the rest of it can be a little simpler, and you won't be hunting and pecking for colours. You'll pretty much get them right, especially if you've pre-mixed them. So what I'd usually do next is the cast shadows. These belong to the ground, so I don't paint them as part of the objects. I paint them as part of the ground. Interesting thing about cast shadow is that the value of a cast shadow depends upon, well, obviously it depends on how much light is falling on that part of the picture, but it depends upon the value that it's being cast upon, not the value of the object. Now I have a mid-grey ground here. I could easily have put a bit of wood in here or something, but I'm actually painting with a mid-grey ground. So the cast shadow is slightly lighter than the darkest dark. And I want to put that into the painting. Again, I'm not sure if the camera is going to show that clearly. Now here again, I'm going to put in all the cast shadow bits that I feel I need to put in at this point. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to make them at least reasonably finished. Because at this stage, I haven't painted any of the object yet. So I have quite a lot of freedom to mess about and blend edges and stuff like that with the cast shadows. Later on, although I might still want to do some adjustment, it's going to be much more difficult when I've got thicker paint on the objects. So again, this is mostly for exercises. I do this, although I do it sometimes on other paintings too. Is I'll paint the cast shadows first and get them reasonably well finished. I'm just going to do it. Ordinarily, I'd spend quite a bit of time on this. I'm just going to do it fairly quickly. So I've got a smaller dry brush here, mongoose again, and I'm going to, because I've got a smaller area, I'm going to blend these a little because I want these smooth edges to be in there now. The wider the kind of hatch you do, the softer it will be. So for here, I can do a wider hatch at this point, and then a finer one here. And when I pull it down, I'll get a bit more blend at this end, a bit less blend. So I'll get a softer edge as the shadow goes further away, which is pretty much what we want. I've got a fairly, this front edge of that cast shadow is fairly sharp. And this back edge is extremely smooth. It just goes away to nothing. So I want to get that if I can. Now I think handling of edges is really, really important. I'd put it up there with drawing. I do put it up there with drawing, color, values. I think you work with the scale of edges, like you work with the scale of values. And for instance, in a painting, if an edge of one object is disappearing behind another object, like the edge of this pair is disappearing behind that one, it may not look like that in reality. It may be quite a sharp edge, but if I blend that, it will appear, if I soften that edge a little and I keep this one sharp, this edge will appear to recede against that one. And that's the kind of thing that you can do in a painting, which may not be exactly what you see, but it helps to create more of a feeling of reality, an impression. illusion. Okay. Now, as I said, ordinarily I'd spend a bit more time on this, but I think that's probably close enough. I find generally, once you've got to this point, you should start to be getting a bit of a feeling of light and depth. It should start to appear by now. The next thing I'm going to do is to go straight in with the shadow planes of the pairs, the darkest parts of the pairs, where the form's turning away from the light. And again, I don't want to paint too thickly. Now, here's my first brush. This is Rosemary's brushes, long filbert. So I'm getting here the darkest of this string of colours here. And I'm going to attempt to approximate the shape. Now, interestingly, the darkest part of this pair here is actually slightly darker than the background tone here. So that might be an adjustment that I want to make a little later. And as I say, I'm painting it fairly thinly. I don't want to clag too much paint on at this point. This again is, I'll put a little bit of solvent with it, a little bit of terps to help it thin out a little. Oh, but not too much. Ordinarily, I mean, everything I'm doing as I'm painting this is compressed in time. Ordinarily, I'd be spending longer on trying to get the shapes of these shadow areas as close as I can to what I can see in the subject. A painting like this, ordinarily, I'd probably spend maybe 4 or 5 hours on if I was trying to do it carefully and bring it to a reasonable level of finish. Obviously, not expecting you to sit and watch me paint for all that time. That would be grim, right? Now, there isn't really, on this pair over here, there isn't really a bit that is that dark. There will be that tiny bit where it's turning away from the light there, so I'll just put a touch of that in. But I'm going to concentrate mostly on this pair over here for the moment. So the next thing I want to do is to put in my half tones. Now this is where I have a bunch of colours pre-mixed, obviously, for this, and I'm going to go in. There's my darkest dark was here. Sorry, let me try and turn that a bit more to the light. I'm going to be working around here to put in the half tones. Between those two, probably, I think is going to be right. Let's have a look and see. I'm starting to paint a little bit more thickly now. And really, I'm not doing an awful lot different here than I was doing when I was doing this little area down here. I'm just modeling from dark to light. Got way too much dark up there. Okay. So now I'm going to bang straight in. I'm painting really broadly at the moment. I'm going to bang straight in with the lights. At this point, I start painting a little bit more thickly. I'm not thinning down the paint at all. It's going to come straight from the tube. And I'm looking for areas that I think pretty much match this color. Another thing that I would often do, and for the course that I'm putting together, it will be an exercise intended to be repeated, is to judge these colors across the surface as you model. using the colour checker. Sorry, I just had a moment then, as I was saying might happen earlier, when I actually forget that I'm supposed to be talking and I just start painting. It's the strangest thing. I ordinarily would never paint and talk at the same time. But it's actually quite a challenge. I'm not bothering to do any blending at the moment. Painting really broadly, not finely at all. I'm just hoping that I'm somewhere near to what I'm looking for. I think I'm getting pretty close. I'm slightly lighter for some of this, as I move towards the bit where the light is strongest. Even though very little of this has been painted at this point, you should really start to get a bit of an impression of the form. And if you don't get it right at this stage, there's no point diddling about and doing lots of detail with it. Not really. Because you'll only end up with more to repaint later. Much better off, I think, getting things pretty close at this point. Now, I've got to an interesting point in this pair now. I'm up here, and it's where there's that other colour that I was telling you about. So I'm going to change to some different brushes at this point. As I was saying, I've got a bunch of these Rosemary's brushes, long filberts. So I'll grab another one of those and put in what looks to me like it's close to that kind of brighter, lighter green up here. It's kind of interesting painting this way because you don't really see how everything is going to work until you've I'm going to put a bit down here as well, I may as well, because it's going to go down there. You don't really see how it's going to work until you've got quite a bit of it in. I'm not sure if I'll actually get as far as painting both pairs. Let's take a vote once I've got a little bit further through this one, if we want to keep going, or if you think that's enough and we'll go to a Q&A. Now, I'm not actually trying to paint the detail of that green colour. I'm really just kind of putting in patches of paint where I think those colours are. Now I want this this kind of light strip down here. I want to get that in now. So let's see how light I have to go. Not up to white. It's quite easy, I think, when you see something like this to just think, oh, that's the white bit, I'll just put the white in there. It's often not, and I don't think it is this time. I think it's light, but it has some of the local colour in it as well, so I'm not going to try and overdo that too much. So if you blur your eyes, which is what I do an awful lot whilst I'm doing this, is to blur my eyes to try and get an effect of what the painting would look like when all this is kind of blended in a little bit more. Gives you a clear idea of how things are going to look. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm just going to try and adjust the focus of the camera a little bit. go onto the pairs and away from the painting. It just struck me that you can't actually see that. I probably shouldn't have done that because I'm going to lose the focus on the painting. Let's go back to the painting. I'll help you to see a little bit, perhaps what I'm seeing. Because of course you are seeing the pairs slightly blurred because of the camera has a very short depth of focus, narrow depth of focus. And I don't see them that blurred because I can refocus my eyes easily. It's one of the difficulties, I guess. Shortcomings of the technology. As amazing as it is, there are still some shortcomings. So I'm going to carry on really just refining this a little bit now. Just kind of sighting from one to the other, looking for where I can see differences. This edge is plainly too light. Too dark, sorry. So I certainly want to be bringing that up a bit in value. And because I've already got paint there, I can't just paint in the value that I think it's going to be. Obviously, it's going to mix as it hits the paint that's already there. So I need to paint. I need a slightly lighter value than I want to end up with on my brush. That looks better. We should be starting to have. That's one of the cats asking to be in. The same one who was in here earlier on. He's a devil. We should be starting to have some kind of feeling for the form coming in now. And I often find that if I just get out one of my dry blending brushes and blend this division just a little between the shadow plane and the light. It starts to help quite a lot with the feeling of the form turning. As I say, ordinarily I would be spending longer on each of these stages. I've lost some of the dark there, so I need to go back in and add that back. Excuse me, especially here. And around here. But we're starting to get a bit of an impression of form now. What I've done there is just put a little bit of a darker value in just on the edge, just to try and turn that form just a little bit. I'm still working with very general patches of colour at the moment. But hopefully you can start to see how sorting out the values first, doing a reasonably accurate drawing to begin with, and then having this kind of this opportunity to do a direct comparison between the subject and the painting helps you see where you might need to make adjustments. This is actually extremely loosely painted for me. I wouldn't normally paint this chunky. Okay, now I've gone over by about 15 minutes now, but hopefully you can start to see how the form is beginning to appear in this pair on the left. You can see the direct comparison. There's still obviously is work to do on that. This is where it gets hard to stop, where you can see something wrong and you just want to go in there and change it. In particular, the value down here wants to come up with this kind of lighter strip where the light is hitting. I didn't think I would need to, but I'm actually going fairly close to white with that now. I think I need to be a bit lighter here too. Okay, so I'm probably going to leave. I could do a bunch more detail on that pair, but what I wanted to demonstrate to you was how setting things up first, making sure you have the right, or you have a reasonable value balance, and by checking the colors that you need first and seeing where you're going to struggle with. Sorry, it's really hard to leave it alone now. Struggle with the bits that you're going to need to paint, the colors you're going to need to paint, and where you'll be able to hit them easily. If you sort all that out ahead of time, it actually makes it much easier when you come to paint the subject itself. A big dirty grey shadow it now. I don't want while I'm here. Let's just put a suggestion of that top bit of that sticking. So yeah, I'm going to have I'm going to put it to the vote actually. You've hopefully seen enough of what I painted there for me to demonstrate what I'm doing and the kind of approach that I'm taking. Hopefully has been helpful to you, I can carry on and finish the other pair. Or would you rather go straight to a Q&A now? I'm really happy to do that, whichever people would rather do. If you want to sit and watch some more painting and that other pair going in, then that's fine. I'm happy to do that. If you have somewhere you need to be and are getting a bit bored of sitting watching paint dry, then we can just do like a Q&A straight away now, if you would like. You let me know in the chat what you would prefer to do. One vote for carrying on. 2 votes for carrying on. Some blending on the left pair, huh? Yeah, I could certainly do some of that. Everyone wants me to carry on. Okay, I'm a bit surprised. I thought you might be getting bored by now. But I'm also secretly quite happy about it as well. So I'm more than happy to keep painting and put a little bit more of this in. And basically all I'm doing now on this pair over here is exactly what I was doing on the other one. I'm just trying to look for patches of colour and sticking them in. To a large extent, I think it's not really until you've got the canvas pretty much covered that the full effect starts to come in. So I tend to try and get the whole thing blocked in roughly before I start doing any blending. I promise I will do a little bit in a minute on that pair on the left. Bear in mind that as I'm painting, I don't know if you do this, but if you've never tried it, I highly recommend that you try it. The whole time I'm painting, I've got my left eye closed. My right eye is my dominant eye, depends which is your dominant eye, but I've got my left eye closed and I've slightly crossed my eyes. So what I've got is a single point of vision, which is slightly out of focus, which really, really helps when you're trying to judge color and value. It really helps with that. I need to go quite a bit lighter here. Some of the shapes I'm getting here are desperately out. I would love to have spent more time on getting that more accurate than I have. But I'd be sitting here painting for like 3 hours, and you'd be sat there watching me. I'd be lucky if anybody was left still here by the end, at the end of the webinar. No one to ask any questions. We don't want that. Oh, I just painted over the shadow. That was a bit of a mistake. What's interesting in this part of the pair that I'm painting now, and down here, I have a bit of both those colours, the kind of motley greeny, the lighter, higher chroma colour, and the darker one too. I'm not going to try to paint each little mottle, if you like, accurately. But I can probably get fairly close to a suggestion of it. But I don't want to get too caught up in that stuff, fun as it is. it's way too early a point in this painting to start diddling about with that kind of thing. Trying to get that bottom edge of the pear. There's a nice darker bit of value down here, which is helping to turn the form a little. What I guess you can't see me do as I'm painting is I'm holding my brushes here against the palette, and I've got a little thing here. I'm constantly wiping the brushes, and I'm constantly swapping from one brush to another depending on which bit I'm painting and what colour I'm putting down, trying to make sure that I don't pollute one brush too much. And I do that mostly by value. As I was saying before, I'll have a half tone, a shadow, and a lights brush. Although actually, looking at my brushes now, I've just realised that I've confused one of them, which is, I do that sometimes. I no longer have a darks brush. It's ended up being a mids brush, so I'm going to have to get another new darks brush coming, because I just lost this lovely cast shadow down there, which is really helping to show the form there. I'm also a little bit here and there, I'm adjusting the premix colours that I've got. As I was saying with the colours, the component colours, if you like, cadmium yellow, sap green, and yellow ochre that I already had on the palette, that I used to premix the colours with, they're always going to need a bit of adjustment as you go along. Yeah, I think we're starting to get something of a feeling now of the form. Now we have, oh, that was too dark. Now we have a continuously covered bit of canvas or paper. Now here's something that I think is nice. The thing that I was saying earlier on, I'm going to do a little bit of blending now. Obviously there's still a lot more to do in terms of, oh, I can't, sorry, there's just one bit that I've noticed that I just can't do. It looks absolutely horrible. I'm going to do a little bit of blending. I get my little blending brush out again. Give it a quick scrub on the paper to make sure it's dry. And I'm going to soften this edge here just a bit. Now you can probably see close enough what I can see to know that that edge doesn't really look that like that. It doesn't look that soft. But softening it really visually in the painting really helps to knock it back behind the edge of the pear on the right. So if I'm lucky, if I hit about the right value here, I can just give myself a sharper edge coming around here. I think that's about right. Which should make this pear just come forward a little bit from the one behind. Edge control is a really useful thing to practice. It's not exactly what I'm seeing there. It's not quite you know, I'm not trying to paint exactly what I see. You know, you've all heard that thing, but you hear people say, that's not art. You're just copying what you see. Now, frankly, I wish I could copy what I can see. Most of the time, you can't. Most of the time, you have to find a way to translate your visual impression into a painting, which will be something different than what you see, but you hope gives an impression of reality. That you can do. And I personally think that edges is really a very large part of that. I'm looking at the top bit of this pear now, and it's frustrating me because I can see, because I've rushed the drawing out, and because I've rushed this bit and I'm trying to talk at the same time as painting, that the shape is wrong. Really bothers me, that kind of thing. But I've gone too far into this really to make that much difference to that now. I'll probably just end up making it worse if I diddle about with it too much. All right, I'm going to do a little bit of blending on this pear on the left. I'm just looking for bits where I think the edge is a bit too hard. I'm doing that same thing. I'm just doing kind of hatching and then just dragging a little through the paint. But because the paint is thick here, I have to do it carefully. Because what I don't want to end up with is everything just kind of mixing up together and looking the same. That would be rubbish. It all ending up the same value and colour. It's really easy for that to happen. So when I'm hatch across and then drag through. So really what I'm doing now is I'm flicking my eye from one to the other, and I'm just noticing differences and thinking about what I can change. To bring what I've got here closer. And the general impression. To what I can see in the subject. I'm into, I suppose, I think of this stage as I've blocked it in. I know I've got the values pretty much right, broadly speaking, or at least right, and perhaps that's a misleading term to use. I know that they're working reasonably well. They're not exactly the same as what's in the subject, but they're close. And they're working. They have an internal logic. They're working to create a feeling of form. which is what I want more than anything. Actually, it's an interesting exercise to do, is once you get a bit of practicing with this kind of stuff, is to paint an object the wrong color, because you paint a lemon blue, you know. I don't actually paint the lemon. I mean, do a painting of a lemon and make it blue, or make it some other color, and you can kind of stretch your ability to manipulate color that way. This is something I think, for some reason, visual artists seem to have this, fear is the wrong word, but resistance to practice. And when I say practice, I don't mean just doing paintings. I mean doing exercises. You know, I talk about a lot on the blog, as if you read the blog, you get bored of hearing me talk about this stuff. Sports people practice. You know, golfer, they practice their swing. How often do we just practice our brush stroke? How often do we just practice that stuff, isolate it, and just figure out what we need to do to get better at just being able to make a stroke of paint go exactly where we want it to go? We don't. We do it very rarely, if at all. But that kind of practice is brilliant, because I think there's a feeling that it will make you less creative. But if you just see it for what it is, just practice. By developing your skills to a point where they become second nature, automatic, it frees your processing power, if you like, your mind's processing power for other things. Like, it frees you up to be more creative, I believe. I should stop. I'm getting really self-indulgent now, and I'm just enjoying painting this, and there's a few harsh bits that I'll just kind of soften off a little bit, because I don't want it. They're just annoying me a little. But I think I've probably gone about as far as I need to with this. Hopefully to demonstrate what I mean about working site size, what the benefits are, having a look at the colours and all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna stop there. So what we'll do now. Oh, I've gone half an hour over. I'm really sorry about that. I hope that didn't get boring for you. What I would love to do is to spend even more time on this, refining it a little bit further. It's one of those things already. You know, what I could really do is someone to come in the room and take my brushes off me, or I'm just gonna sit here and paint. But if you have any questions about anything, anything at all, if you can type them into the chat now. I'm very aware that while we're focused in on painting on my live paint cam, there's quite a lot that you can't see going on. You can't see what's going on in the palette. I'd love to figure out a way I could have 3 cameras going at once, and then I could kind of switch. I'm going to go back to the main camera on the laptop now. Back. Well, let me put the other light on. Okay, so I hope that was instructive. I hope it showed you some stuff that you haven't tried before. Someone says Clearly, it's a pleasure to be. It absolutely is. I find it really, really hard to stop painting. I think once you get to a point where the really frustrating bits of painting, like getting the colours accurate, reasonably accurate, being able to get an impression of solidity and light into your pieces, it really becomes enjoyable. And once you get that basic stuff sorted out, if you haven't got that basic stuff sorted out, I can only speak obviously from my own experience, painting used to be a deeply frustrating exercise for me. I sometimes wonder why I stuck with it at all. And I think it was just that I was so desperate to be able to do it well. So I did stick with it. I learned a bunch of stuff, found some good resources. There's some brilliant resources out on the web now these days to learn about colour and light and all this kind of stuff. And when you get to a point where basics are taken care of, then you can start to think about where you want your art to go. And because you have the processing power free, even as you paint, to do that. And I hope that some of the stuff that I've showed you today will help you get a little bit further through that. Someone's just asked me if I sell my paintings. I'm not averse to selling them. I know I can't pretend to have sold very many. I did sell one just before Christmas, which was nice. I've got some in a little gallery in Denmark. And I'm actually thinking about doing some small flower pieces and auctioning them, because I love to paint flowers, you know, and it would be really nice to do that. So I may, at some point, if you're a subscriber to the blog, you may get an email at some point saying, look, here's a little flower painting, check this out on eBay. And, you know, it would be nice to have gallery representation too. I would love to be able to write instructive stuff about how to get in galleries on the blog. But my life has gone in a different direction for the last few years. We started a family, we adopted a couple of kids, and I stuck with the stuff that I knew was going to make me a regular living at the time, and that wasn't painting, it was some other stuff. And now I'm going back to painting more. Do I ever do portraits? Yes, actually. I haven't for quite some time. But I do love painting portraits. The interesting thing about the kind of the concepts that I'm talking about here, the kind of the comparisons, understanding the value balance, judging the colors, modeling form. Excuse me, my cold is really getting the better of me now. That's all the same, whether you're painting a portrait or whether you're painting a little still life. Still life is brilliant because you can control everything so well. You can do it at home, it doesn't take up too much space. But I love to do portraits and would like to do more of it, but they're very time consuming, I find. Nelson, hi, it's really nice to see you there. Yes, there is going to be a recording available of this. This is a Google Hangout. So there will be a recording. It's automatically recorded and put onto YouTube. So I'll be sending out an email with a link to the replay. So I think you can download the video from YouTube, maybe. I'm not sure. If not, I'll see if I can download a copy of it myself, and I'll supply it for download as well, so you can keep it. Yes, you're right. I do need to stop talking, and my voice is hurting a little bit at the moment. So hopefully, as I say, this has been interesting and instructive. As I say, I'm going to do another one of these. What I've tried to do in this one is to give a general overview of the kind of the approach I take and will be taking to teaching still life painting. So the course that I'm putting together is going to be teaching all of this stuff in detail. It's kind of like the level of resolution changes depending on what medium I'm using. On a blog post, you might have seen the blog post that I put up a couple of days ago where I talked about a lot of this stuff. It's difficult to get across any kind of detail at all in a blog post. In a webinar like this, which is, you know, this has been over an hour and a half now. I can paint for you and I can talk about the stuff as I'm doing it, and I can get a little bit further. for the course, there's going to be this video demos and a structured series of exercises to show you how to build each of these skills that you use with this kind of stuff. Like blending, for instance, that kind of hatching and smoothing thing, drawing out neatly, being able to judge colors, how to mix the colors once you've judged them is an art in itself. So all that would be included as well. But it's difficult sometimes to get the level of detail across that you need to. Someone's asked me what brushes. Again, they're mostly the Rosemary's brushes. Check them out. They're absolutely brilliant brushes. I'd always thought that the brushes I had were pretty good until I got some Rosemary's brushes as a present from my mum for Christmas. She's spent about 70 quid on brushes for me, and these ones I absolutely love. These are the long mongoose filberts. Rosemary's brushes, highly recommended. It's like they're like the Rolls Royce of brushes as far as I'm concerned. Lovely to paint with. You'd love to see me paint flowers. Flowers are hard. I love to paint flowers. It's my favorite subject. Maybe I'll do a flower painting webinar one day. No, that's mongoose. Bristol sometimes too, but those are mongoose. Yeah, flowers are pretty much my favorite thing to paint at the moment. So perhaps I will. But it's the same thing with flowers. If your drawing is accurate, you can do really fine edge handling, and you can control value and color well, then you'll paint good flowers. You know, these are the concepts that go behind all good work, and you can either refine it so that it's extremely finished, like the Dutch still life painters, tradition that's still going on today, or you can paint really brushy, you know, like the Leffel kind of end of things. That only works if your colors and your values are good. If they're not good, it doesn't work at all. The white I use is titanium white. White is interesting. I mean, the differences I find between titanium and flake is that flake is really good for impastos. It's gooier. You know, I use Michael Harding's paint, and in this paint at least, flake white is gooier, and you can kind of get strings off the end of your brush, which is good for highlights and stuff like that. Titanium white goes slightly lighter, and it also has a slightly bluer cast, whereas flake white has a slightly yellow cast. So if you're right at the extremes of chroma and are on a high value in a yellow, you might be better off using a flake white if you're trying to mix, because titanium white might actually drop the chroma too much. But there's not really much in it. Most of the time, my workhorse now is titanium white. I find it easier to mix with. Have I ever taken art classes? Now, that's an interesting question. Yes and no. Art was always my favorite subject at school, and I loved it and did quite well at it and all that stuff. And I went did an A-level we have in the UK, and then I went to do a foundation course. And then I went to do a degree, and it was in the middle of the 80s, so it was all about conceptual art, you know. And my thing was that I always loved to draw and paint realistically, so I didn't last very long at college. I haven't done any formal classes since then, but I have learned a huge amount from some people online. A lot of the stuff that I do now to do with color and value, I learned from Graydon Parish, who you may have heard of. Is certainly worth checking out if you haven't. Amazing painter, who's done a huge amount of research with Munsell. And I attended a lecture once of his, and it was all the spark I needed really to start me going down this line of accurately judging colors and what a difference it could make. What learning resources do I recommend? The Harold Speed books. Get both Harold Speed books. Do the exercises in them, don't just read them. They're great, you know. If you want to learn an awful lot about color, David Briggs' Hue Value Chroma site is excellent. Another question, is it true that the local color is warm and the highlight? If the local color is warm, the highlight is warm too. Not always, depends on the light. If the light has a color, then it will change the color of the highlight. If you have a very bluish light, it doesn't matter if you're painting something with a warm local like an orange, the highlight will be its reflected light, so it will be affected by the surface of the local, but it will change hue if the light has a color. So it always depends on the context of the light that you're working in. How do you know how much paint to mix out? It's not a silly question. It's a really good question when pre-mixing out the neutral strings. For the neutrals, let me show you. I tube them up, you know, because I use them so much. It's the only, usually if I'm just painting for myself, if I'm just trying to just do a piece of work and I've got an idea and I want to work it out, usually it's only the neutrals that I'll have pre-mixed on the palette. There's value 3, value 4, value 8. I've got them all down here. And I'll maybe do 2 or 3 bits of pre-mixing on the fly as I go for other objects, but I won't do this much. But I did an awful lot of very careful pre-mixing when I was learning this stuff, and I find I've done so much of that now that I don't really need to do it so much now. So these I have tubed out, and I just put out a little bit, so I can always put out a little bit more. Interestingly, I've massively overdone it with my palette this time, and I've got quite a bit of paint to clear away there, which I don't like to do. And I suspect it was because I was slightly nervous about doing this painting, and I wanted to make sure I didn't run out of any colors in the middle of the webinar. I hope that answers the question a bit, but it's really, that's just experience. How much do you need? You get used to it after a while. Yeah, it is complicated to remix a color in the middle of a painting. You know, I'm not sure what the best advice is to give you there. You can just get used to mixing on the fly. Again, it's like everything else, it comes with practice. If you want to get good at mixing color, a good exercise, I think, is to take a little. I've got a actually I'll put a video up in one of the blog posts, so have a look at the blog, the Learning to See blog. I think it was about 2 or 3 blog posts ago. I put up a video demo of mixing color using the idea of hue, value, and chroma to hit the color. But if you use one of these and put it on something, what can I use that would be good? My coffee cup, right? Put it over something so you isolate the color, and then again get one of these little swatches, mix up what you think that color is, and hold the thing over it and see how close you've got, then adjust, and then adjust some more, and adjust some more, until you've absolutely nailed that color. And it's in that last little bit of mixing when you're really fine, that you're making really fine adjustments, that you really stretch your ability to mix color and your knowledge of your pigments. I don't think really in pigments anymore when I'm painting. I don't think burnt umber, raw umber, yellow ochre. I think in terms of the hue, the value, and the chroma, and it takes a little while to remap your brain to think about color that way. But for me, it's really helped me to paint more realistically. There's no doubt about it. Yes, that's true. You can put leftover paint in the freezer if you want. What we can also do is stick it in little bits of cling film. I mixed up a little bit too much of this value 3, I think. Stuck it in cling film. I've had that for about 2 weeks hanging around. Just squeeze out a little bit whenever I want. That's quite handy too. One thing I would say don't do is, I did a long time ago, is put them in syringes, because the end of the nozzle is too small and it all dries up and gets stuck in there. Horrendous. Don't do that. Put them in tubes instead. Carry on, but I would like to see one totally blended. Actually, I don't tend to go in for totally smooth blending myself, because I like the objects themselves. What I would normally do, if this was more finished painting, the cast shadows and the bits around the background would be very smoothly blended, more smoothly blended, but the object would still be left a little bit more chunky, because I like that kind of physicality. But it's personal preference, you know. And as I was saying before, as long as you get the basics right, you have the freedom to go as far into blending and fine detail as you possibly want to. Some utterly beautiful work can be made that way. But if you go right into that fine detail and blending and the basics aren't there, it's not going to work, you know. Do I save leftover paint as mud piles for neutrals? No, because I mix my neutrals very strictly according to the Munsell neutral scale. So I use titanium white, ivory black, and a little bit of either burnt sienna or burnt umber. and I very carefully match them, and those are the only neutrals I use. Even then, they will pull the hue sometimes if you use it to drop the chroma of a color. Generally speaking, we'll pull it towards yellow, but I know that they do that, so I can compensate for it. What I don't want to do is, by just squidging together a load of random paint, is give myself difficulties by bringing in too many variables. Try and control, especially when you're learning, try and control as much as you can of what you've got on your palette. I think that's probably pretty good advice, because painting is a complicated business, and it's probably not a good idea to make it any harder on yourself than it already is. Do I use lead white? Yeah, I use flake white sometimes. Yeah. As I was saying, one of the things I used to love doing, I used to paint a lot of little silver pots, and they have this lovely little highlight around the rim, and you can get like a string of flake white off the end, on the end of your brush, and just pull it across, and it just works wonderfully. It stands out, from the painting, so it really stands out. So for stuff like that, I'd use it. Yeah. Do I put out a full palette, just the colors I plan to use, just the ones I want to use? I mean, that would be very wasteful for me to put them all out when I don't need to. Depends very much on what I'm painting. If I'm going to paint something over a few days, then I'll just put out the colors that I need that day, Oh, the glaze question. Sorry, I've missed that one. There's quite a lot of questions coming in. I'm having a bit of problem keeping up with them. Could you repost the glaze question? Oh, do you glaze? No, actually, no. Because I generally find that I can get whatever I need with opaque paint. But it's not because I particularly don't like it. I'm sure some really beautiful effects can be produced with glazing. I have done some before, where I painted a long time ago. I painted some paintings with neutral underpainting and then glazed over them. So painted over them thickly with semi-opaque paint and then wiped it off. And it was nice, and it did give it was a different effect. It did seem to give a kind of a depth to it. But generally speaking, I find I can get pretty close to whatever I want to get with opaque paint. It's one of those things I would quite like to play with, but it's kind of not at the top of my list. Yeah, cling film. Most useful things to have in the studio: cling film, blue tack, and paper tape. For sticking stuff together. Cats, not so good. Okay. When do you use a toned ground? Rarely, actually. Sometimes I do. I don't think it makes an awful lot of difference for me personally, because I do all of that judging of the range of the values and the colors first. I kind of like that feeling sometimes, I must admit. I kind of like that feeling of painting on a white ground, because starting a painting is like falling off the edge of a cliff, and then gradually, as you start to fill it in, and because nothing looks right at first, you've just got to trust that you've measured it fairly closely, you've judged it fairly closely, and then gradually it all pulls together. And I kind of like that kind of, whoa, what's going on? And oh no, it's all right. I did get the right color. It does look really. But toned grounds are easier to work on. I think that's fair to say. And I've been thinking more about doing some more of that again. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. Would there ever be a situation where I'd work from a photo? Good question. I have done before a long time ago. I used to do street art, actually. I used to copy old master paintings on the street in chalk, to keep the wolf from the door, many years ago when I was in my 20s. And people used to come up with me with these desperately terrible snaps of their kids and ask me to do portraits, and I would do them. They weren't very good. But yeah, I have done that. I prefer to paint from life. It's interesting. I took the other day I did a painting, and I just got a pretty good camera, which I was using as the live paint cam there. It's a Canon EOS 760D. And so I've been taking loads of photos of all kinds of stuff. I'm really excited about having this camera that makes me look like I know what I'm doing when I really don't with the camera. And I took a photo of the subject. It was a setup like this. I painted it. Now I took a photo of the subject, then I took a photo of the painting, and I printed the two off, and I compared the two, and the photo of the painting appeared to have more depth than the photo of the subject, which I thought was quite interesting. Painting from photos is a complicated thing, because it's not just whether you paint from a photo, it's whether you paint from a photo on a monitor or whether you paint from a photo, a printed photo. If you print it off, then you've got something like a similar value range than you've got with paint, from your lights to your darks. If you're working on a monitor, then it's not much wider. I don't know how wide it is, but a monitor is basically emitting light, and it has a much wider value range, and that's going to be slightly different. One of the things that worries me a little bit about painting from photos for me is that I don't know enough about using a camera to make sure that I get a really good photo. So I have to rely on the camera's decisions about how to compress the value range, and I'd rather do that myself. I'd rather make those decisions myself. But I have nothing against working from photos, and I'm quite aware that people do some very beautiful work working from photos, or even working from stuff that they create in Photoshop and stuff like that. I think there's nothing wrong with that at all, as long as you produce a beautiful piece of work at the end of the day. How you got there doesn't really matter. The one caveat I would say is that when you're learning, it's better to work from life, because you get all that hard practice. It's hard, it's difficult, but you get all that practice of compressing the values, and it helps you to realize that what you're doing when you're making a painting is not painting what you see. You're translating your visual impression into something else. You're making a painting. You are creating just as much when you paint realistically as when you're doing some other kind of work. You know, you still have to create something new. And if you only work from photos, I don't think you'll ever realize that. I think when people are learning, there's a tendency to try and copy the photo rather than to create something. But that caveat aside, I think there's nothing wrong with it. The squinting, demonstrate it. Okay, I close that eye. Right, now what you can't see is then I've just thrown this one. I've gone a little bit cross-eyed like that, just a little bit. So my vision is now blurred. So I've got a single eye point, which is slightly out of focus. That's what I do for kind of judging overall color balance. Squinting, you just squint. It's useful for checking values. Oh, the questions are coming in way too fast. I'm sorry, I'm spending too long answering each one. Is cadmium yellow worth the extra price? Compared to what? I'm not sure. I use it because sometimes if I'm painting, if you're going to paint a yellow, a lemon, say, you're going to need a really high chroma yellow, and I'm not sure cadmium yellow or cadmium yellow light. I'm not sure there's another one that has a chroma that high. Assuming that you want to paint it, with a similar chroma to what the actual object has. I don't have enough experience with other kinds of yellows to say. I often see Naples yellow on people's lists of paints that they like to use. I've never used it, so I don't know. I find cadmium yellow fine. I think it's not worth stinting on your paint. It's not worth painting with cheap paint, and just the same way I think it's not worth painting with cheap brushes. Have respect for what it is that you're creating, and stump up the cash to get decent materials. Old Holland, Williamsburg, Vasari, Michael Harding. They're outrageously expensive, some of these paints, but they're worth it. Do you mix your greens from blue and yellow? Interesting question. No, I don't. I'll use whatever pigment color is going to get me close to the target color that I'm trying to get. So for these greens, I used sap green. I'll show you. That's Winsor & Newton sap green, which I found is pretty useful green, low value, high chroma. Yellow ochre and cadmium yellow for when I needed a bit more chroma in the lights. White, I've got my greys to knock them back to where they need to be. Raw umber and burnt umber. Burnt umber is useful because it allows you to go quite low value with still a bit of chroma for the more shadow areas. So I don't care what color I start with, as long as I get somewhere close to the target color, Can you describe the lighting setup? Yeah, actually, this is the first time I've really used this lighting setup. Let me... I've got wires coming out of my laptop all over the place, but I may actually be able to, if I disconnect that one, show you a little more. That's it there. It's this big softbox thing on a stand. Sorry, I can't get this any further away because the mic is plugged into it, and now you can see a bit of the living room as well. See, I've got this backdrop thing here that's just to reduce a bit of distraction. And I've got another softbox over here, but that's just for while I'm talking to the camera. If you like, if it would help you, I'll do it because it might be useful, right? I'll in the email that I send out tomorrow with the follow-up and the download of the video, the link to the video on YouTube, I'll also include a link to the lights that I'm using. I got them from Amazon. You can get very similar things if you're in the US. In the UK, these ones are by Photo Geeks, and there's some very similar ones in the US by Cowboy Studio. They're photographic lights, and they work all right. With the foam board setup, do you have a hole in the top for light to show through? No, I don't. I just have the light kind of slightly higher and over to one side so that it's only open at the front, but you could easily have a light over the top with a boom, and that would give you a different setup entirely. I haven't played with lighting that much. There's loads you can do with it, but I haven't played with it that much because I usually work in natural light, so I just stick my stuff next to a window and I'm away, But actually, I might start playing with it a bit more. I could imagine it could be quite fun. Is there any advantage to using the acetate sheet color match against simply holding up your brush? Yes, it's flat. So it's easy to make sure that you hold it at the same angle to the light as your painting surface is, and that is absolutely crucial. If you hold it up at a different angle, it will be completely out. There will be less or more light falling on it. So you have to, that's part of the idea of the foam board thing, is that you can hold up your color checker parallel to the foam board, which is parallel to your painting surface. So you have the same amount of light falling on the color checker as you will have falling on that color when you stick it on your painting. It's absolutely crucial. When you do it with a brush is round, it's and it also has hairs in it, so that will affect your perception of the color. So yeah, absolutely use something flat. Anything else? Okay, I think I've caught up. I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to stop now because, frankly, it's way past my bedtime. I usually go to bed at 9 o'clock, which is when this webinar started. I get up ridiculously early, so I've been drinking coffee to keep myself going through this. So I'm probably not going to sleep, but I'm going to have to wrap up now. Thanks again for coming. Thanks for all your questions too. Really interesting bunch of questions. I hope I've answered them well. If you have any more questions, if I've missed any, or you think of any more, just email them to me, and I'll do my best to answer them. And watch out for next week when I'm going to do an in-depth values webinar, which is, value is something that I worked with exclusively for a long time. For a period of time, I gave up working with color altogether and just worked with value, and it's a really good thing to do if you want to nail your values. I think value is a good route into color. It's like the basics of the most important part of color. And if you don't get your values right, you're going to struggle with just about everything else. So that one will be next week, probably the same time on a Thursday. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for coming, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.